This week on Tinker's Toolbox, I'm joined by Sean from the Arcanery. We're talking about encounter building and everything around action economy and how to balance your encounters as you go and in prep. Welcome to We Speak Common. Hello and welcome to the D&D podcast for everyone, because here we speak common. This is a show brought to you in partnership with the Dice Dungeon, who are your one-stop shop for amazing D&D dice, both metal and resin, shipped from the UK worldwide. You can get 10% off with the code We Speak Common at checkout, or follow the links in the description of this episode. And it's also brought to you in partnership with our new partners, Describe, who offer box text for your home games. With over 14,000 scenes of places, monsters, spells, and a collection that continues to grow, if you're not a creative writer, they've got everything you need to make your world feel real and described and lived in. It's Describe, DSCRYB.com. You can use the code COMMON on checkout for 10% off, or, as ever, follow the link in the description below. We'll talk more about both of the partners some point through the episode when I spring it on my wonderful guest at random for great effect, and get into what you can get with them too. Of course, we're also supported by our wonderful Patreons, and if you want all the details on that, as ever, it's in the description below. I am joined today by my new friend, Sean. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
How you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me on, man.
No worries. Well, thank you for putting up with my annoying planning around time zone difficulties, because I always feel bad when I'm like, oh, yeah, jump on the show. What's your time zone? How early do I have to make you get up?
No, it's fine. Strangely enough, I'm used to working in GMT time, so it's good. GMT time, redundant, but whatever.
Yeah. It's so bad that I don't even know what time zone I'm in, because I just say, oh, I'm in the UK, and I let other people work it out. Because daylight savings and things like that messes around with it. Like, is it GMT or is it BTS or what? So,
right. It's all nonsense.
Yeah, I never paid attention in school. If you didn't realize, I was always reading like The Hobbit and just thinking about that. So you're from a wonderful, I'm going to call it group, and you're going to correct me because I want to hear it in your own words. But the Arcanery. So before we jump into everything, give me the elevator pitch. Tell me about what you guys do.
Yeah, we create content to make GMs' lives easier. All of the little nitty-gritty things that GMs and DMs have to do that maybe they just don't like doing, maybe they're not good at. We take the things that we think we're not good at or we don't really like to do, and we create those things so that others don't have to. And then, of course, we do things that we really like to do as well and hope that other people like those things. But tips, tricks, tools, cheat sheets, roll tables, adventures, NPCs, just anything in the world of TTRPGs, mostly 5e, that you need to make your life easier. That's what we're trying to build in our little lab.
Nice. I always we've been sort of Twitter stalking each other for a while, I think.
Yeah.
And I always have a little wander over and have a look at what's going on, because it's kind of like the way I like to think about it, like the simple way of describing it would be like, you guys are doing what I do in a different format. So like we're all on the same wavelength, and it's a lot of fun to not only see other people's like ways of going through things and the different ways that they tackle things, which is kind of what this show is all about, but also to see how they format it and put it out in the world. Because like I always find, I don't know if this is true for everyone, it might just be my brain, but whenever I'm stuck on something and I'm trying to work it out, like maybe it's an encounter or maybe it's a quest line or something, I'm like, well, how does that really work? How can I sort of write it out and look at it. But if I see someone else write out a similar problem in their own way, it just reorganizes it in my brain. So yeah, you've got a really great thing going on. And I think the easiest way for people to go and find you, but we'll do all of the links and things at the end of the episode. If you go to the We Speak Common Twitter, if you're already following us, we've tweeted back and forth a few times, so they're going to be on there somewhere.
Yeah, you'll definitely find us there.
You guys are really good at doing the follow Fridays. I actually got one because we were recording on a Friday today. I got one today, and I'm always so bad at like getting involved with those. I
Uh,
feel so bad.
Steph, our wonderful chief of marketing, is just
Mm.
absolutely delightful at reminding people to do those things and poking us to do engagements and things like that. So,
Mm.
not to mention a brilliant creator in and of herself. We just got very lucky in that she has other skills as well.
Yeah, for sure. I've got my good friend Sam is he does a lot of marketing for me on my Instagram account
Hmm.
for We Speak Common, and I was like, I was just talking to him about it the other day, and I was like, I'm really busy. Can you give me some ideas? He's like, okay, here's what we're gonna do, and he's like, boom, boom, boom. I was like, wow, okay, here's the login. Have some fun.
Right.
So
It's a
I
school of
yeah
magic that I have not been trained in.
yeah, I appreciate it, but I will never understand it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, fully.
Brilliant.
So, before we get into our topic for today, what's your, I suppose, like D&D history or D&D career?
Yeah, I've been playing since the early 90s. I started playing with second edition AD&D. At least technically, that's the rule book that we had. We didn't
Hmm.
use most of the rules in it, but that's when I started playing. And then a few years later, the person that was running our game stopped, and I still wanted to play, so I started running games and been running games ever since. I've, you know, gone through the various editions of Dungeons and Dragons, mostly skipped over 4, but I don't hate 4 quite as much as a lot of people do.
Mm.
I don't like playing 4. It was never fun to play, but I liked taking things from the books. I've stolen so many ideas from 4th edition and fit them into other editions, or 5th now. But
Yeah,
so yeah, I've just been playing for the last 25, 26 years and having a blast.
nice, nice. I think I was actually looking at a load of the AD&D art like just last night because I love the I don't know how I describe it, but the art from that era just kind of sparks something in my core,
For
like
sure.
that's so D&D. Like I love the art from fifth edition. Like now it's so crisp and it's got its own style, but something about that kind of retro feel about it.
Yeah,
I love it.
it's a little, it's not that it's not professionally done, but it feels DIY. It feels fantasy. It feels like people are drawing these things straight from their brain, as opposed to
Yeah.
painting these gorgeous sweeping things. And like you said, the 5e art it's gorgeous, it's crisp, but it doesn't feel like it's pulled directly out of my mind in the same way that AD&D did.
Yeah, I sometimes look at like because you can look at a dragon drawn in one book and sit in another and they'll have completely different proportions and they're kind of a little bit like there's a cartoony aspect to them, but they're not cartoony at all.
Right.
And I think that style makes me think, oh, I could draw some D&D stuff and it would
Yeah.
fit in here because I can't draw to save my life. Whereas like 5e is just so expertly done, and they've probably got thousands of reference images on lizards and things like that when they draw a
Right.
dragon. It's funny what you say about 4e as well. Like 4e gets a lot of bad rap, but I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head on why it's a good edition because it's got so much lore. Like they
Yeah.
expanded on so much stuff that I think some of it has kind of gone out of the window now with the change into 5th edition. But if you ever need like just some inspiration, 4th edition is a good place to look. And I only played like a small amount of it as well. So
yeah, the game itself was fine. It was fine. It wasn't 3.5 and it wasn't 5e, but it was there. But yeah, the lore is incredible. It's such a rich world that they've kind of left behind. They'll get back to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a really interesting theory on that I think I might have to get into one day, but it's far too long-winded for today. So we're doing a Tinkerers and Toolbox episode today, Tinkerers Toolbox, and we sat and tried to work out, what we wanted to talk about, and you brought up the always popular topic of encounter building.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about encounter building a lot over the years, as as you imagine you would, it's kind of a core aspect of,
Right.
of playing D&D and being a DM. But one thing I don't think we have ever touched on is, or at least not properly. We may have mentioned it side to side. I mean, it's been a while. I can't remember every episode, but is action economy and how to balance that inside the encounters that you're building and making sure that you're either not gonna wipe out your players and get a TPK within the first round, but also not have the reverse happen to your nice cinematic climactic battle.
Right. There's nothing more annoying than creating this giant end of a arc combat and having your players walk right over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's happened to me. I mean, there's a few tales from the Dragon Heist campaign where my lovely big, not evil guys, but antagonists just got absolutely wiped, and I learned a lot from that. Like, yeah, it kind of felt disappointing for me, but the players had an absolute blast with their planning and execution, so that's always good. But one thing that always comes up for me is this action economy nag, this niggle that kind of doesn't get in the way, but it always seems to be a last thought for me, and I've been trying to change that mindset going forward. So I think it would be good to talk about our opinions on encounter building in general, the kind of things that we do, and then give some tips and tricks for it. So first of all, I think, and I want to check base with you and make sure that we're on the same page. I would say that action economy 100% is literally boils down to how many actions you can use per turn, per round, and that's it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's how many actions you can use, how many, to break it down even further, how many things can someone do in a round, or how many things can the party do in a round versus how many things can I do in a round.
Yeah. Cool. And I think I was looking it up. I was doing a bit of pseudo maths, I like to call it. And I think I've worked out that on average, a player character has at least one more action than any enemy or creature would have, and it usually comes in the form of a bonus action. It's not flat across the board, because there are exceptions, and there are creatures that use bonus actions, but those are usually tied specifically to special features. They're not like, a creature doesn't get a bonus action unless it has a special feature that uses that bonus action.
Right.
So it's already off balance in bias of the players if you've got one player versus one creature. That's just a couple of things I want to put out before we really jump into talking about encounter building and stuff, because that's, now that I know those in my brain, it kind of highlights different things when I go through my encounters. So I think that might help getting that out straight away. So, Sean, big dollar question. How do you design your encounters?
Well, I never start with action economy. I always start with where the encounter is coming from in the story. So that determines a lot of things, and especially in a homebrew campaign, it can hinder me in a lot of ways because I'm not balancing these creatures based on their actions. So when it gets down to the action economy, I usually sort of, once I'm at the end of building my encounter, once I have where it is in the story, what its purpose is, I then look at these creatures that I've gathered together and say, oh, well, that's not going to work, is it? And so when it comes to the action economy of it, I have to sort of cheat sometimes, but that's because I'm always starting from a place of story. I'm always starting from a place of what's interesting to the players. What do they want to do right now, and how can I make that harder?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So that's where I start, and action economy always comes last. How about you?
Yeah, I'm quite similar there. I mean, I've always been story focused anyway. I don't think that's a secret, but I tend to, like, let's say I've got players who are wandering from point A to point B, and I need to come up with some fun encounter in the middle. I will usually, if I have the freedom to, find just a creature I think's cool and start there.
Mm-hmm.
If they're in a very specific location, like, I don't know, they're in a jungle or they're, walking along a coastline, then I will narrow it down to what fits the location. But it always starts at what would be fun for the characters to come up against. Is there anything they've heard about? Like maybe they've heard about a roaming owlbear or something. Would it be cool to bring that owlbear in now? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I build the encounter by literally saying, well, there's 5 PCs. I've got an owlbear. They might walk through that, so I'll also add, I don't know, a little owlbear family, 3 cubs and an owlbear mum. And they can be down the road a little bit, and they might join if the fight goes too easily. Then, and this is more recent, I will look at like, and I don't really use the CR system, not really. Like I reference it, but
Same.
I don't really. It just there's, and then that's a whole topic in itself. But it doesn't quite work out the way I think it's meant to, and I will usually like look at the XP values and whether that comes into the whole deadly, dangerous, easy, hard system that works against the CR system. But I have found that whenever I build a deadly encounter, and I mean like ridiculously in terms of looking at CR and XP values, ridiculously down that end of the scale, my players can still cakewalk it. And I don't know whether that's because they're like really good at D&D at this point, or because they just know how to get round the way I run enemies or things now. Like we've been playing for a long time, but they walk over it. So I'll look and I'll think about it, but I don't go off it. And then I'll look at things like, or now I start to then look at things like action economy. So I think we're quite similar in that aspect.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And that's before, I don't know how your campaigns run, but any campaign that has any number of magic items also starts messing with that action economy, and definitely starts to throw CR into the less useful, not ever unuseful, but the less useful way, because my players are the same way. They walk straight through deadly encounters. I have a low magic campaign where they don't have any magic items at all, and they can only use spells that require components, and they still manage to walk through deadly encounters. But
I think, gone.
Oh, it just so CR is like you say, it's a whole other conversation, but it is still a useful thing to keep in mind, especially if we're talking about action economy, because action economy is what part of what Wizards has used, I think, looking at the creatures to balance the CR for 5e, that it always goes into their calculations. Not that I've talked with anyone from Wizards about this, it's just what it seems like looking at how they've managed the actions of their creatures within their monster manuals and Volos and whatnot.
Yeah, I think as with anything, it's, you can't completely ignore it. Like if there's a rule you don't like, you can you might be able to just say, okay, we're not going to use that rule, like flanking, for example. But with CR, I don't think you can completely just disregard it. There are certainly aspects of it, at least, that kind of link into everything else, and so it's always a good base to kind of look and get a feel for a range. And I say this all the time, and I always say it feels like a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's different for every group. Once you know like how your group plays, if you can get a feel of like their range of CR, rather than saying like, oh, a CR6 against level 6 PCs makes sense. It might be, oh, my players are this good at using their character abilities that somewhere between CR6 and 12 for 4 level 6 PCs is about right. And that can change from group to group. But yeah, it's CR's a strange one, and I can't I can't dwell on it because I will talk about it all for the whole episode. But with the magic items, I think specifically, I mean, in Dragon Heist, my players got a lot of items by the end of it, and I'm quite. I put story first, so when players come to me, like I had a wizard say, "Oh, I want to change my subclass. I'm not happy. Like we've been playing for like 2 years. I want to change it up." And so we worked out a story way, a quest, like a facilitating beat that allowed for that sort of natural progression.
Yeah.
And so when you start doing things like that, and your players start changing up their abilities, or they start multi-classing, or they start looking up optimization videos on YouTube and things like that, then you start coming up against the whole thing of it's just pure maths. And if my players can do this, this, and this on one round, but my creature can only do this one thing, it's going to go out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And magic items 100%, and it boils back into that thing of players get a bonus action, creatures don't. If you've got a Staff of Power, you bonus action a spell out of there, or you action a spell out of there, and then bonus action something else. That's already so much more effective than you would have been without it. So yeah, I completely agree with all of that. So, and I want to say I'm not very good at maths, and I think D&D comes down to a lot of maths. I think action economy is one of those things. One of the arguments I always hear is add another creature or add minions, puff out the encounter so that there's not just one creature. And while I think that is a valid answer, I don't think it's the only answer, and it also kind of bugs me that I now have to run like 20 minions as well as my one owlbear, like 20 baby pop owlbears as well as my one owlbear to make my owlbear a threat. So what are the things that you look at and you think about when it comes to that stage, when it comes to that point where you've sat down, you've gone, okay, I've got my encounter, like I know what the story be, I know the creatures I want to fight, I know I want it to be, kind of difficult but not too difficult. You're at that point where you might look at action economy, but before you get to that, what do you kind of how do you plan? What do you think about? How do you get into that?
Before I start really thinking about action economy, this is the beginning of thinking about action economy for me. I'm looking at the story I'm telling. I'm looking at what this encounter is, and then I'm looking at these creatures, knowing that my players are going to walk through them. But I don't want to add, like you say, I don't want to add another 30 minions, mostly because I don't want to run 30 more minions. Doing a whole bunch of low HP minions that they're going to just cleave through is fun for them. They get to do that. And in a big boss battle, like a campaign ender, maybe I'll do something like that to give it that emphasis, to give it that oomph for the players and make them excited as they fight this tough creature. But in general, I don't want to do that. So the first thing I do is I look at the environment. Where are they for this encounter? Because you can actually easily balance not easily, but an easy trick to balancing action economy is to, without ever even looking at the actions of players or monsters, is to look at what the environment is. It's and use it similar to a lair action for a more powerful creature, except instead of having that lair action be a spell or whatever, it's just there's difficult terrain that slows your party down, and that takes something they can do away from them. So if they could move 30 feet and they need to move 30 feet, but it's difficult terrain, they have to decide whether or not to burn their action to dash to get there. And so that's balancing it out a little bit, especially if I'm using ranged creatures against them. If it's possible to have some sort of trap in there, or something that functions like a trap that will take a round away from them as they try and deal with that, that's balancing out the action economy. So that's the first thing that I look at whenever I'm trying to make the encounter a little more balanced than it otherwise would be for me. And that's also something that I can do without having to expend any extra thought when running the campaign. When we're actually there sitting in the session, I don't have to roll any more dice. I don't have to do anything. It's just already there, part of the world. I can simply say, all right, so that's difficult terrain, so your movement is halved. It's layer actions, pre-running layer actions. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I look at is reactions, and this is a little easier when I'm running a fully homebrew campaign, but it's also easy enough as long as I'm not trying to run anything super official. There are, monsters have reactions. They don't generally have a lot that they can do with those reactions if you look at rules as written. Just staring at a stat block, but there are lots of other things you can do with reactions than just an attack of opportunity. Your monsters can ready an action, things like that. All of that is kosher rules as written. And then also, I often just add a reaction because why not?
Mm.
um, it's sort of like a legendary action for a legendary creature, except it's not a legendary action. It's just it's a reaction. It's something that makes sense for this monster, something that they would be able to do logically, but rules as written can't. Like a bullywug, rule as a reaction could maybe try and slap out at a character. They're poisonous. They slap out at a character, and then there's all of that. So just sort of seeing what their reactions can do. And in my truly homebrew campaigns, I give them fancy reactions, and occasionally I build creatures that have bonus actions. But using just the stat blocks as is, I try and look at what these creatures could do with a reaction that isn't necessarily explicitly stated in the stat block, but isn't breaking the game, isn't, making up something completely different off the fly.
Mm. Mm. The other thing as well is that, like, just even if you are just playing a written adventure, there's nothing stopping you from changing up those stat blocks and
Yeah.
Games are the games that are published are meant to be melded by you to fit your table and your group. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I don't think anyone actually plays the game fully rules as written anyway. Like I would be so surprised, like even by accident as well. There are so many little rules and things that you forget, and you just
sure.
change up to fit the group better.
Even at a con table, you're not going to play 100% rules as written.
I think one of my favorite things to do as well, especially if you've got players in your group who know stat blocks very well, like when I was playing with Joe very regularly, he had as much of a knowledge for just the rules and the books and the monsters as I did, that when I put something in front of him, he would, without even thinking about it, he'd be like, oh, I'm going to use this spell because they're probably fire resistant. And sometimes he'd be wrong, and sometimes he'd be right, because, like I say, no one can know everything. It's like there's no room, and our brains aren't hard drives. But what's nice is to take a creature that's seen often and just twist it a little bit and change it. Like, okay, let's go back to the owlbear analogy. Let's say this owlbear lives in a volcanic region. Well, okay, well now it's fire resistant. Like that's interesting. That's fun, and it's a little change. And it can be small things like that, or big things too, like adding in those special reactions. And I don't think doing that is wrong at all. With environmental factors, oh my god, love environmental factors. It's like, if you're not using them, just use them. Just start doing it. Long-time listeners will know that we've raved on about things like avalanches and lightning and thunder and rainstorms and things in our encounters, and they can add so much, not only just to like the stakes of a combat and the will we won't we survive kind of feeling, but it just makes the way you think about as a player, like what you're going to do, where you're going to go, how you're going to use your what will feel like one or two small things that you can do every turn.
Mm-hmm.
And difficult terrain is one of the easiest ways to pop it in, because like you say, you don't have to roll anything, it's just kind of there. Or things like, a thick fog, so okay, well, you can only see 30 feet in front of you, very good for horror campaigns. And then you can go as big as you want as having storms and chucking it down with rain, which can be a visibility thing, or it can be, oh no, you're holding your big lance next to you, that's basically a lightning rod. Like you can go as intense with it as you want. So yeah, I think that's a really good place to start looking to balance out that, oh, they can do more than my small little bullywug can do. And I think my final point that's in the back of my brain from hearing all that is as well, like, I think DMs have this innate, I say this from my point of view, but I think they have this innate fear of playing their creatures too smart or playing them properly, because no one really wants to kill off their players, do they? Like, it's not, like, yeah, it's fun at times if it fits right and everybody's in good spirits, but sometimes it's just like, I just feel bad. I remember nearly killing off Phoebe's character in one of my games, and I just felt so bad. Like, she survived, but afterwards I was like, I'm sorry, it's just kind of what happened. So I think there's this kind of built-in worry that if you play all your creatures completely as you should, rules as written, it's gonna be too tough. But one big bit of advice is that I find for me is that if my players are if I'm thinking my players are well equipped and they're good enough at the game that they're gonna walk over anything, then my creatures should be also well equipped and good enough and realistic enough that they kind of live in this area, or they do this kind of thing. They attack camps at night regularly. That's how they survive, so they're going to be good at that thing. And so things like readying actions or distracting or using stealth, all of that should come into play to make your encounters more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I think maybe that kind of already balances a bit of the action economy. Like, if you get a surprise round in there, you've already sort of done enough to at least tip the scales into a more balanced area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with that completely. I loved what you said there about if your players are good enough to walk through it, then the creatures should be good enough to exist in this environment. It's paraphrasing, but if because you're right, if this is what they do night after night, day after day, if they live in this harsh terrain, then of course they're able to survive in it. And if they're able to survive doing this, then yes, your players are the center of the story that you are telling, but if you give them those extra tactics, if you let them use things, if you add these sneaky reactions that aren't in the stat blocks, it makes the world feel bigger, which makes the game more immersive, in my opinion, and therefore more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really good book. Actually, I've got it over here somewhere. Oh, this is not a sponsor. It's just a very, very good book. It's by Keith Aman. I think that's how you say his surname. It's The Monsters Know What They're Doing. It's got some big name reviews on the back, and I got a copy of it quite recently, and it's all about looking at your creature stat blocks and running them in a more tactical way. And when I say tactical, I don't mean like, oh, you're looking at a grid map and you've got X many squares that you can move and you can fireball from that point on the square and it would hit everybody. I'm tactically as in like they are creatures that have instincts, or they're people that have knowledge, and this is how they would use it. And that was a big, like, having that book to go through, and like, let's say I've got a beholder fight coming up, and I'm like, well, I know my guys know it's coming. I know they're prepared for it. It gave just enough context of like, well, a beholder is paranoid. They create a lair for this reason. In the lore, they do this for this reason. So they probably fight like this, and they probably use their eye rays like this. And here's what you do if you roll this random number. And it's like just a new way of looking at an encounter to balance out that kind of difficulty or sway to one side. So definitely recommend it. I know I recommended it to a few people in my group, and they all grabbed copies and were like, oh my god, yeah, this is a good read.
I've seen the title.
There's a player version as well.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I've seen the title. I haven't gotten it, but I've seen it pass by, but I'm gonna order it as soon as we're done chatting here.
Oh, it is definitely a good read. And like, it's one of those books where you read the intro, so you get a good feel of how it's set up, and then the rest is just broken down by monster, so you don't need to read the whole book in one sitting. You just kind of, when you know you've got to run a dragon, you look up dragon, and you know when you've got to run a unicorn, you look up unicorn. And then you read that section, and then you use that knowledge. But yeah, it's one I'd seen around for a long time, and I got it for Christmas, and it's just such a good, it really is a good book. So Keith, if you want to sponsor me, hello mate, I'll sell your book for you. But yeah, there's a player version as well if you're worried your players will be too wiped out. But yeah, there is a couple of things that I think come really handy in encounter building and looking at things like balancing out that action economy. Sean, can you guess what one of them is?
A couple of things.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mind just went completely blank. No, I was still thinking about that book you were talking about.
Oh no, it is a good book. It is a very good book. Well, one of the things that you need definitely is a fantastic and beautiful set of dice, and that's where my brain was going anyway.
Oh, I love dice.
Yeah.
You're so right.
Oh, me too. How many sets have you got?
That's an incredibly difficult question.
You don't know.
That in front of me, just within like eyesight and arm's reach, I've got about 15.
Oh, that's good. That's a good number just in sight.
Yeah,
that's very good. How many of those are metal?
2, 3 are metal sets.
Okay. So it sounds like you could do with at least one more set of metal dice then.
I truly could. Absolutely.
Well, look, what I'm going to say to you, Sean, is the Dice Dungeon is a wonderful place to get beautifully crafted metal dice. And if you're feeling a little bit lighter, you can go resin too. I won't judge you. And if you use the code We Speak Common on checkout, you get 10% off while supporting the show. It's a wonderful little deal we got going on there for you, Sean. I don't know if you want to make use of it. I mean, I know you've already walked away with one purchase here of a book, but I mean, you should some dice to you too.
Can never have too much dice.
I was actually talking to Ben from the Dice Dungeon the other day, and the ship times out of the UK are actually very, very good. You'd think it would take a long time to get something overseas, but hey, even with the mess that the world is in, we can still get dice to you. So that's good.
I will say, I know that this is not what you were looking for, but I actually have a set of Dice Dungeon dice that is actually one of these sets. They have a
which one?
It's the metal, the purple ones. I think they're the radiant purple, I believe is what they were called.
Are they fully purple, or are they the silver with purple in them?
No, these ones are the fully purple ones, with the sort of silverish white numbering. They're one of the, I really like, they've rounded the corners on the D6 in a way that feels really satisfying in my hand, and then the D4 and D8 have really sharp points that I just truly, truly love. So that was not at all a plug for anything other than I happen to have that dice right here, and I think they're gorgeous. So
I think that might be the Fairy Fire set, but I could be wrong. Without looking at the pictures, I wouldn't know, but it sounds like those ones. That is the second use of the Dice Dungeon dice, is if you get at least 4 sets of D4s, you've got, I mean, technically 5 becomes caltrops, but they are pointy enough that if you had a home invasion, you could probably defend yourself with them, so that's always good. The other thing that you always need for good encounters is box text, which I don't know about you, Sean, but I love writing box text. I know a few people who hate writing it. Are you a creative writer?
I love writing. I'm story first, sort of like you said, and like you are clearly, and I love writing it up. But I know a lot of my friends aren't.
Well, hey, for your friends, and if you ever feel you've got that writer's block in front of you, Describe is a wonderful place to go. dscryb.com, because, hey, they're kooky. And not only is it places like, actual physical places, monsters, items, I was having a look through their index today, and there's box text for things like, a 10 days travel by foot on grassland. So if you've been doing a little bit of traveling and you've exhausted your owlbear encounter, but you need to describe how you walk across fields of seagrass deep that comes up to your hip, then they've got you covered there too. If you use the code common on checkout, 10% off there too, because we'll look after you here. I always love trying to be as natural as possible in ad read, Sean, and it sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I probably would have gone toward dice truly if I hadn't been just so brain focused on, wow, that does sound like such a really cool book. I've got to get that. I have to remember.
That's fine. I like to try and confuse people as to when it's going to come up. It's become a mini game on the Discord server.
Oh, great.
At what point is Ben going to randomly launch into his ad segment? And that's the best thing as well, because when it's when people don't know it's coming, they're already halfway through it before they realize it's happening.
Right.
It's like subliminal messaging. So back to the main topic at hand. Okay, where do I start with this? Normal creatures have their set actions. Legendary creatures have legendary actions. Creatures in lairs have lair actions. And I suppose we should give a slight mention for mythic actions if you're using that rule from Theros, which I haven't actually used yet, but I have got a very nice supplement of like legendary creatures, like named NPCs and monsters and things that have mythic versions of them. So I do really want to get into that. But obviously when you've got lair actions and legendary actions in play, the economy balances out easily, much easier anyway, because you've got all that stuff that you can do on other players' turns and things like that. But I do feel that it still is in favor of the player, and it should be in a way, because they're the players and they're the protagonists. We don't want to add creatures. We've talked about adding reactions or using things like readied actions. Is there anything special that you throw in, because I often look at things like, oh, let's say I've got a really powerful wizard and he's got robes of the Archmagi, he's got a staff, he's got his spells, but he can only use his staff or his spells on one turn, so I'll give him a legendary action to use his staff on the end of someone's turn. I already feel like I've done a lot there, but then I get my player come in and somehow manage to get his staff out of his hands using his roguish abilities, and then I instantly lose out on all that that buffing that he had. Is there anything that you do to combat that kind of situation where it's not an economy thing, but it's a situational thing?
The situational difficulty, yeah, because you're right. You lose that staff, and what do? You're doomed. But the types of things I try to add in to that are to give them another trick up their sleeve. You've already done so much, like you say, you've created all of these things, you've given him the legendary action, but what is one small thing that this creature, this character can do to get out of that type of situation? So if the rogue's disarmed him, if his staff's down, that staff immediately afterwards is on the ground. So what's something that this creature can do to get to that staff before anyone else does? That's the type of thing that I try and look at. So I would, in that particular case, and just because I know my party so well, I've been playing with the same groups of people for quite some time over the years, whether in different campaigns. So I know the type of tricks that they're going to try and do. So I would, in that type of situation, if I had a rogue who liked to disarm people, I'd give him a free disengage action as a legendary action, or I'd tie him into that staff in some way, so that he can use his reaction to regain that staff. Maybe not immediately, and he can't then use it immediately afterwards because he's used that reaction or that legendary action. But I tried to give him something he can do to get back to that staff, or something he can do again with his environment, because I really like using the environment. Maybe he triggers a trap, maybe he causes an avalanche, maybe he dives behind a series of rocks. I like setting myself up to have options. And so those are the types of things that I like to look at for how to get around. And also, I guess this kind of goes back to, we were talking about monsters being smart, but if it's a later difficulty encounter, if you're talking about someone with lair or legendary actions, then, they shouldn't be dumb. So hopefully they've not tied all of their power into this staff. I would, Sean would, if I was a super mage. I'd be like, I've got this staff, I no longer have my staff. Oops. But these creatures are, super powerful megalomaniacs or whatever. So I hopefully that they have more than just that up their sleeves.
And we talked before about changing around their actions and things. When the only risk is, if let's say you made the staff a reaction ability, the only risk you have is looking at then tipping the balance too far, because then are they casting, I don't know, a fireball from their spell slots and a fireball from the staff in one turn? Okay, you might have gone a bit crazy there. Slow down, Satan. but that's an option too, and I think all of the stuff you say is absolutely spot on. I remember running, I did for Halloween last year, Strahd Must Die Tonight, and running Strahd as a very well thought out and tactical creature who phases in and out of the walls of his castle and disappears from sight every round it was a lot of fun for me as the DM. A little bit frustrating for the players. Oh, God, we can't see him, we can't do anything. But that's the trick of the encounter. That's kind of like the puzzle mechanic around that encounter with him. But a lot of that stuff I find is stuff that you really have to think about beforehand. Like in your planning stage, when you're really sitting down, you're saying, okay, they're going to fight this creature in probably this room. If they move, they'll go into this area. That area's got some columns they can hide behind for cover. And things like that kind of like level of detail of, I could get him behind cover and get a plus 3 to my AC or whatever. I could go, I could do this and get this bonus. Like that kind of level of thinking is sometimes what you need to go up against those balancings of action economy and what your players are doing. But I know for sure that I sometimes am like, I just I can't get that deep into thinking about this counter. I just need to get it down on paper so I can run the session tomorrow. And I know that there are DMs, and I was one of those DMs when I first started, who just forget to think that deeply sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So I don't know about you. I'm gonna take a risk here and hope that I don't say something you completely disagree with, because some people hate the idea of this. But I always think that a good get out of jail free card, you've got your climactic fight, the players walk in, the paladin crits, he smites for 6th level, instantly your creature's on 1 HP, and it's going to go down on the next turn because the next turn up is the barbarian. And maybe they're all high level, so they've got multi-attacks, and you're sitting there thinking, God, what am I going to do? Sean, I hope you don't hate me, but sometimes I just throw a bunch of extra HP on there.
Oh, absolutely. 100%
Okay,
the
good.
same thing. I don't think that's wrong in any way, shape, or form. I think that that's you actually being a good dungeon master, because sometimes it is fun for a party to just walk through something. Like we were talking about that earlier. It can be fun for players to do that. But if it's a big fight, whether it's a big fight because you were really excited about doing these things, or it's been building up for it, so your players are excited to get to it, and then suddenly they crit, and sometimes the dice are against you. And like you say, that paladin crits with smite, and you're down, and that's not as much fun for them. It's certainly not as much fun for you. And there's nothing wrong with just, oh wow, that. I guess actually this creature had double the amount of HP that the stat block said. Look at that. That's so weird. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. You have to be able to improvise things on the fly like that. And yeah, sometimes you don't have time to go through every detail, or you don't want to go through every detail as grit and, nuts and bolts as how many columns and things like that. That's a lot of work. And I like prep, but not that much. So being able to allow yourself to do things like that, I think, is a great thing as a DM, because it does make the game better. Because as long as you're only doing it to increase the enjoyment of the game and not just to, mess with your players or kill your players, because that's not fun for really anyone. I don't like killing my players that much anyway. Sometimes, yeah, but
it depends what they've said to me before the session starts.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I absolutely. And it does balance, back to action economy. It does help even that out a little bit, because it means they have to use more of their actions to take this thing down.
It goes back as well, I think, to what I was saying earlier about if you've got that player that knows things about the game, and maybe they're not, it's not metagaming, but it's just kind of like, because I think there's a difference between metagaming and just kind of knowing stuff.
For sure.
And I had a fun encounter with the group they were going to take on a wizard, but the wizard had a simulacrum, and they were trying to work out, like, oh, are we fighting the simulacrum or are we fighting the wizard at this point? And they kind of knew it's simulacrum because he wasn't as scary as they were expecting. And when he died, he turned into snow. That's always it's a big sign. If you ever kill someone, they turn to snow, probably not the real person. But they had that knowledge, that kind of meta knowledge that, oh, a simulacrum has half the amount of HP as the original, and they'd kind of done the maths and worked out that they dealt, I don't know, like 280 points to him, and they were like, okay, so the main guy when we fight him is going to have like over 400 HP. And I'm sitting there going, no, I just bumped up the simulacrum because you were walking all over him. I just gave him a little bit of extra health. So that's always fun as well, because it then takes that meta knowledge and just kind of rips it up and throws it in the bin, because you're trying to plan it out, but you're not quite right. It's like trying to map out somewhere, but you've drawn a corridor slightly too long or going in the wrong direction. And that's always good fun, I think. Are there any? Go on.
I absolutely agree. Most of my players are also GMs themselves, so whether they want to or not, their brain has that knowledge, and it's different than absolutely metagaming outside of game, discussing things, but you can't help it. It's in your brain. One can't stop that knowledge from being there. So anything I can do to surprise the player always makes me happy.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I like that's why whenever I'm building like encounters, or when I'm building storylines or plot hooks, or just like set pieces as well, there are often things in there that, because my stories all sort of run into each other and they happen in the same world. So there are call outs or appearances or cameos or encounters with creatures that call out to something that happened to a previous party. So the players will get that fun bit of, oh wow, that's the thing that we did before, but the characters know nothing. And I always find that particularly is a fun way to test whether your party's metagaming, because they're like, okay, do we know that they're resistant to XYZ, but our characters don't, so I'm gonna cast fire. And it's always good as well to see the difference, I think, between that, oh, pure on metagaming knowledge, and oh, this is a fun thing that I know as a player but my character doesn't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. What I was going to say was, is there anything else that you can think of that you do on the fly if you found yourself sitting in an encounter and going, oh, I probably should have planned this a bit more?
Well, we talked about how little I like, and it seems you probably feel as well, but I do always have creatures in my back pocket. If it's really going poorly, add some sort of minion or friend comes in. That doesn't work so great for wilderness encounters, though. And one of the things that I try to do, if it's just going really, really poorly, run. Because if they disengage, just because it'll lengthen out, maybe it turns into a chase, maybe it doesn't, but if they disengage and if they can get enough distance, then the party doesn't know what happens when that creature is hidden in the trees. Then it's out of sight in the trees, and it ate a magic mushroom that happens to be a good berry, or something like that. But regardless of whether you're doing anything like that, if you run, because things, when they're hurting, they run, that gives you just a little bit more time to think, to come back to something tactical. And it's I think it's a thing. It's definitely a thing players don't do often enough, in my opinion, but that's just an opinion. And it's something I certainly don't do with my monsters enough. They don't run away. They're not. I so rarely play them intelligently enough to run away, and that's something that I try to be better at, because that can give them the space to, again, the party then has to dash to catch up or use an action, whereas suddenly they're shooting arrows from the trees. That's something that I often forget, but always try and have in my back pocket, is disengaging and setting yourself up for a better position.
Yeah. I think it's so players definitely never run away often enough, and I always like to, especially when I DM for new players, I always like to say to them, it's an option. If you are struggling, you can try and get away. It might not work, but you can try. But with creatures, and I mean, people is a no-brainer. Like, a person is going to try and protect themselves. If it's a humanoid with intelligence, it's probably going to try and get away if it's in a bad shape. Creatures that are more territorial, or if you've gone into a nest, they might fight to the death, because it might be a defensive kind of thing. They might be trying to protect a cub or something if it's a creature, like an actual animalistic creature. But yeah, the other fun thing as well is if you're in a location like a forest or a dungeon where they can get out of sight of the players, maybe by darting into thicker trees or around a corner, it's that point where you then get that kind of semi-advantage back as the DM, because just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's still running.
Right. Exactly.
And usually players will just, if I find anyway, if they do run, they'll just run after it until they can see it again. They won't think, oh, it's gone around that corner, it might have stopped and readied an action.
Right.
So that's always good fun. The trick is getting far enough away to make the running effective. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that's definitely an option. I only started doing it recently when I had NPCs that weren't antagonists, but they were kind of like anti-heroes. Like you could work with them, you could work against them, and the players like Jarlaxle was a really good example. They got kind of buddy with him, but also he was working against them, and it was kind of like a love-hate relationship, where they got into an encounter, and I was like, right, well, he's going to run because I want him alive for future use, and if you kill him, it will just make me sad. So I think if you just think of all of your NPCs like that, like imagine you don't want any of them to die, like their players. It gives that option back, but it also makes encounters more interesting.
Oh, that's a great way to sum up sort of, now I can't stop using the word tactics, but to sum up a good way of just running your encounters in a way to sort of maximize your options. When we go back to talking about DMs being afraid of playing their characters too hard or too smart, play your monsters, play your NPCs, play your villains like they're characters. Play them like you want them to live.
Yeah,
that's a great way to just pithily,
yeah,
sum up all of
100%.
that.
Like, it's certainly easier to do it when it's like a named NPC, like someone that you've played for a long time. Like when you play Curse of Strahd, you get into being Strahd for such a long time, and you know that at the end he's probably going to die. But until then, because a big part of Strahd is that he terrorizes the characters and he keeps appearing. So you play him in a clever way because you want him to survive until that encounter in the castle at the end, and have that big moment. And if you've got the Blackstaff, Lyriel Silverhand, Jarlaxle, any of these named characters that you want to come back and back and back, you're going to play them that way. So I don't know, maybe you should just name all of your little goblins and want Glibglob to survive because he might come back.
That's actually happened to me. I had a goblin who I named not Glipglop, but Gummy Gum.
That would have been weird. Gummy Gum.
Gummy Gum.
Oh.
Gummy Gum was this goblin's name, and I really just somehow fell in love with this silly little goblin, and it ended up joining the party, and it was very strange how that happened. But as a sort of hanger on, but. Yeah, name your goblins, or don't, because then it's sad when they die. But
that's fine, because if you've got your players crying, then you've achieved something on the story side. So
yeah.
The only other thing I was going to say was with your encounters and saying that way, it might not make sense for me to bring just suddenly extra people out. One of the big things when I prepared to run Tomb of Annihilation in the Hex Crawl, there's a lot of random encounters in that, and one of the things I learned very quickly was that you can make those a lot more interesting if you say let's say they've rolled 2 out of 3 encounters in the day, and you combine those 2 encounters instead of one. So now, instead of in the morning they fight some goblins and in the afternoon they come across a T-Rex, now they come across some goblins and they start fighting, and when the goblins start to lose, they pick up a strange horn made of bone and they toot it, and it calls a T-Rex to attack too. And suddenly your encounter becomes more dynamic and also balances back out and becomes a bit harder.
And it's a fun surprise.
Oh yeah,
things like that. I've never done a horn in a T-Rex. That sounds really awesome. I would love to describe and walk through, or sit as a player and have that happen to me. But adding in a second encounter. I've never thought of it that way. I haven't run a hex crawl in 15 years. I don't think I haven't run Annihilation yet. But adding in an unexpected element to the encounter, a different type of creature, something like that, is a super fun way to balance out when it starts to go poorly on you.
Yeah, I think as long as you can explain it in the sense that, like, if the T-Rex just turns up, it's a bit like, oh, okay, it's just turned up, has it? But if you can explain it narratively, if you can give them a bit of flavor text, then a reason for it appearing, then great. You've already got rid of that worry that, oh, he's just throwing in an extra monster because we've done too good. And I mean, bonus points if the T-Rex comes with a goblin riding on its back, because
every T-Rex should come with a goblin riding on its back.
Yeah, that's like a weird world where goblins have taken over, and like Just domesticated dinosaurs. What a weird little island that would be
Yeah.
to visit. I'd do that. I'd totally do that.
Oh, I think I'm going to toss it in a campaign. So I hope I get that in before my players listen to this episode. So
Well, there you go.
James, I know you're listening. James actually listens to your podcast regularly. So,
Oh, James, how's it going, mate?
yeah.
Oh, wow. I
But
see you. All right.
islands with goblins and dinosaurs. You heard nothing about that. I think the same idea though. I'm sorry, this derails us backwards again. Apologies.
No, go for it.
But talking about running around the corner, you talked about in a dungeon you run around the corner. You could do something similar like that, where it runs around the corner, your party follows, and where it's happened to run is it knows that there's an ooze there, or
Yes.
brown mold. Although don't use brown mold too often. I fell into that trap, and it becomes not fun for your players really quickly. But you can do things like that. Think of things like that, and that's a fun way to. That's that. Oh, I didn't talk about this. I have a note to talk about this, but I have I make roll tables for every sort of encounter session that I'm building in case I need to add small monsters on the fly, because I don't like doing it. And so those roll tables have bridged from just being monsters to being things like molds or environmental hazards. And that's just an easy, cheap trick and once you've made the table, you don't have to throw it away. You can go back to it the next time you're in that environment.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if I often find as well, sometimes I'm really in the mood to like prep and like create stuff, and sometimes I'm not. If you really are struggling and you've got books on the shelf, there's so many of those tables that exist that you can nick as well. So even if you're not into writing them up yourself, or you can't find one that suits online or something, there's so many of them. Like, I think even in adventures definitely, but even in Tome of Foes maybe, or is it Volos? One of them has like encounter tables. Just use those. Just go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Someone did the work and they put it out in front of you. Might as well take advantage.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with using what's there as well.
Right.
I always think people are like, it needs to be different. No,
it's different because you're doing it. That's what makes it different.
Well, exactly. Like, the you never thought of goblins and dinosaurs together in one go. There you go. That would have been a different way that I would have done it if you'd have rolled the same encounter together. So yeah, don't worry about that stuff for sure. Cool. Well, I'm glad that you're going to walk away with a dinosaur goblin island at the very least from this episode. At least you've got something out of this.
Oh no, it's been a lot of fun. I've got a lot of ideas and stuff from it. So this has been great for me. And I had a lot of fun talking about how to twist things with players. So it was great.
I just love picking new people's brains as well. Like, I love that I get to just sort of ask questions and see how your brain works. I go, okay, I see what you're doing there. All right. It's a lot of fun for me. A lot of fun for me to just talk about D&D in general. Before we wrap up, do you want to do the favorite part, which is to just shamelessly plug everything that you're a part of?
Oh, right. Yeah. Shameless plug time. We love a shameless plug. Yeah. So I create content with the Arcanery. We're at the arcanery.com, the TheAcranery.com. You can also find us at the Arcanery on all of the socials. But we make all sorts of things. We have an adventure coming out shortly. We have a podcast, a GM's Toolbox, dropping March 9th. You can pick up some NPCs with full personalities and shops, either on the DM's Guild or another full set of 25 for free on our website. And we're creating content all the time. We have all sorts of things up there already. And come interact with us on especially Twitter. That's where I'm at the most. So come find us on Twitter and say hi.
I always say that if you listen to this show and you think, God, I've had some good ideas here and I want to use them, but I don't know, I don't know how to get them down on paper. Having a look at what you guys are doing is a great way of taking the verbal ideas that you've heard here, seeing them in practice, and then using them and or twisting them to your own use. So definitely go and check these guys out.
Come steal our ideas. It's fun. That's what they're there for.
That's what it's all about. Yeah. It's theft, but it's okay.
Exactly. Harmless theft.
Harmless theft. We're encouraging you to do it. Oh, amazing. I'm really looking forward to hearing your guys' podcast as well, because well, I mean, I love the competition, Sean. That's what it is.
Well, hopefully you can pop over and be on ours as well. We'd love to have you.
100%. I will absolutely take you up on that. Which means I've left you with a good impression, which is always good too. Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much. This has been a lot of fun. As ever, if you want to get involved with the episode, if you want to chuck a topic idea, you want to hear a specific conversation, or maybe you want me to talk to someone that you've been following on Twitter or wherever for a long time, at We Speak Common on Twitter, WeSpeakCommon@hotmail.com, and WeSpeakCommon.com for all of the links of all of the things that have been mentioned in this show, including the Patreon and the Discord server. Sean, thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you. It was such a fun time.
Have a what time is it for you?
It is 10 a.m. here.
Oh, great. Okay, so have a fantastic day. It's evening here now, so
Absolutely,
I'm gonna have a fantastic evening.
I hope so.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today. If you like the show, do us a favour, leave us a like and review on your platform of choice, and share us with your friends. Send us to your fellow DMs and players so that we can build our community even more. It really helps to get us out in front of more eyes. If you want to support the show, you can by joining our Patreon. Links can be found in the show description and the episode descriptions on all platforms. The music in the podcast is Street Dancing by Timecrawler82. It's licensed under a Creative Commons license by NC. You can find it on the Free Music Archive.